excuse to avoid doing the work that I need to do. Or perhaps I should say you all gave, I was saying you all gave me the perfect excuse, and I really appreciate it. Otherwise I'd be stuck doing all sorts of things I don't really feel like doing right now. Or perhaps you should all be thanking me for giving you an excuse. On that note, there was a fellow who was in the kitchen at his house, and this fellow who was in the kitchen at his house had a wife who was telling him, "Get out of the kitchen, get out of the kitchen." So he gets out of the kitchen, he goes over to the couch, he sits down at the couch, and as he's sitting down on the couch, his wife starts bumping the vacuum cleaner into his leg and saying, "Get off of the couch," with those big eyes and everything, "Get off of the couch." And so he goes back to the kitchen, and he goes into the kitchen, and he's looking for something to eat, trying to do the mitzvah of getting rid of all the chametz. And his wife says, "Get out of the kitchen." And he says, "I just want to help, I just want to help. I really just want to help." His wife says, "Fine, you want to help? Take your Gemara and go to the base midrash." So he takes his Gemara, goes to the base midrash. 15 minutes later, he shows back up at his house. And his wife says, "What are you doing back here?" He says, "You think I have the koyach to help you all day long?" So again, thank you for giving me a good excuse to be here. It's a pleasure to be here speaking on behalf of a fantastic organization. My understanding is that Akshiva has been around for nearly 20 years. 150 people in active therapy here at any given time. Close to 1,000 people are involved in the programming. That is a lot of good work. So, again, Groiser Yeshur Koyach, to Rav Matzia, to Mrs. Khan, and the team here for all the fantastic work that they're doing. And my honor to be here. But if there are 1,000 families there involved at Akshiva, that's a drop in the bucket, because there are 20,000 families here, and we know that there's not a single house that doesn't have somebody who's struggling. We just have to think about the numbers. Approximately 20,000 families was a good number that somebody gave me, probably more or less. I imagine not exactly 20,000. The chances of that happening is quite slim. But if we have approximately 20,000 families here, I'll give you some numbers. That means that we have 2,000 women who have struggled with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum psychosis at some point in their lives here. That means that we have hundreds of people living in Beit Shemesh, Ramat Beit Shemesh, with schizophrenia. That means that we have easily 1,000 people here with bipolar disorder. That means that we have tens of thousands of nice, lovely Erlich kids running around with ADHD in our community. Good people struggling with substance use, alcoholism, and addiction. There are a lot of people who have experienced challenges with mental health. And that's okay, because it's good people too. I was once okay to sit in my office with a Gadol Yisrael who came in to talk to me about one of his grandsons. And he came in, he sat in the chair, and told me about one of his grandsons who had experienced signs and symptoms of serious mental illness. It was most likely that this child was dealing with schizophrenia. And as he told me this story, he eventually stopped and paused and said, "You know who I am, right?" And I said, "Of course I know who you are." He said, "I know you know who I am because of my reputation and my books, but I want to tell you, I'm actually a good person, and my wife is actually a good person too, and we really try to do a lot of chesed, and we're really tocho kabaro, and our kids are good kids, and the mother and father of this child are really good Erlicha people, and they don't use drugs, they don't hit their kids, there's nothing wrong with them." And I said, "Harav, do you think that I think something is wrong with you that we're here talking about your grandson? Do you think that I think that you're a terrible person, that you've done something to deserve such a gezerah? Do I think that you have a drinking problem? Do I think that your wife has a drug problem? Do I think that your son and your daughter-in-law are terrible people, that you have a grandson who has this condition? And he said, honestly, Dr. Freedman, kind of. And I asked him, Rav, how many kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and even great-great-grandkids do you have? And when he counted them all up, Canaan Hara was some crazy number, like 600. And I said, of course you're going to have somebody in your family with this condition, because how could you not? It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. In fact, it means that you've done something right. That this one child, out of all those children that you have in your family, out of all those grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and out of all the work that you do for Klal Yisrael, that you know that this child is struggling, and you spent time from your busy schedule well into your 90s to schlep out here and to schmooze with me, it means that you're doing something very, very right. Here's a good Erev Pesach story for you. It was Erev Pesach, and as I've already shared, I was trying to dodge doing work in my house. So I managed to get a phone call from the Admor's Gabbai, and the Admor's Gabbai said, why don't you come on over and get the bracha you've been waiting for? And I quickly grabbed one of my sons out from a haircut and another one out from cleaning the car, and then the third one out from a nap he was taking, hopped into the car, drove into Yerushalayim, and went to go get my bracha from the Admor, much to somebody whose opinion I very much values dismay. But I ran out of the house to go get my bracha with my kids, and we sat through 5 straight brises where the Admor was the Sunday for them all, and it was the same oil for them all, and it was chick-chock, and I've never seen 5 brises happen in less than 23 minutes. It was very impressive. And the Admor actually remembered the names of all of the kids afterwards when he spoke. That was perhaps even more impressive, to do that many brises in such a short period of time, and then to remember the names of each person who was involved in these simchas. And we went in to go get our bracha after a lot of pushing and shoving. And when we went in to go to get our bracha, the Admor said to me, and remind me, what do you do? And I said, Kavod Admor, I'm a psychiatrist. I've been zoche that I've worked with a number of people in your Hasidus over the years. And he said to me, that's fantastic. Thank you for helping. And I said, of course. B'diavad, if I can ever be helpful, please let me know. And he said, when I was a kid, Brius Nefesh was b'diavad, but now it's la'achila. So I'm very grateful that you're around. Meaning, there was a time in our community when we thought that this stuff was really has v'shalom, and if it happens, what are we going to do? And it should not happen, and it's not going to happen, and lo aleinu. Yet, we will hope that it will not happen because these are tough challenges, but it will happen because 1 in 3 people have a challenge with mental health or addiction at some point in their life. That is a very big number. 1 in 3. That means that if you look to the left, if you look to the right, if you look at yourself, definitely have somebody who has a challenge with mental health. 1 in 3. That is a lot of people. Everybody knows more than 2 people as a general rule. That is a lot of people who are struggling with mental health challenges. And to think that it doesn't exist and to not be prepared to address this is really where we get into trouble as individuals and as a community. Once we know that there are challenges and we're aware of it, we should ask ourselves, who is at risk? Who is at risk? Who is at risk of developing a challenge with mental health and addiction? And the answer is everyone. So Men, women, married people, divorced people, single people, fathers, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers, uncles and aunts, all of us. Now, certainly a family history suggests that there's a genetic component. Certainly a history of substance abuse and trauma and stress and medical issues puts a person at increased and elevated risk of developing a challenge with a mental health issue at some point in their life. But in the end, everybody has a genetic predisposition, and then enough environmental stress can throw them over the edge. When I was a child, I used to go out to visit an aunt of mine in LA, and one of my favorite places to go was down to Venice Beach, because there's a lot of really cool stuff happening there where you're a kid. And this aunt was kind of fun. She would indulge me and take me on some fun little trips and go down to the Venice Beach, and we would see this very famous street performer who had a turban, an electric guitar, and roller skates. So if you're ever there in the 80s, you probably recognize that guy. If you were not there in the 80s, he exists. That's all I can say. But there was another guy who I'll never forget, and he was a chainsaw juggler. So he would juggle 3 chainsaws, then he would juggle 4 chainsaws, and then he would juggle 5 chainsaws, and then he would juggle a bowling ball, a watermelon, and a chainsaw. He would throw up that chainsaw, slice the watermelon in half, and then sell you a piece of it for $20. And that was a very expensive watermelon, but it was worth it because that was so cool. And I remember about 5 or 10 years ago, it had already been decades, that I asked a cousin of mine who had just come back from visiting the family out in LA, and I said to him, Friam, was the turban guy still there? He said, what do you mean? I said, the turban guy, you know, with the guitar and the roller skates. And he said, no. I said, I wonder what happened to him. He said, who cares? I said, that's a fair assessment. And then I asked him, what about the chainsaw watermelon bowling ball guy? And he said, that's him. And I said, I wonder what happened to that guy. And he said, what do you think happened to that guy? Because you can only juggle chainsaws, watermelons, and bowling balls for so long before eventually it's a bit too tough. Now, some of us are good jugglers. I can go ahead and personally juggle 4 lemons. It's taken a lot of time and practice, but the Eibishter gave me a skill. If you try to give me a 5th lemon, or if you decide that you want to be funny and substitute a banana for one of those lemons, it's going to get ugly. We all have our own skills and strengths, and we all have our own weaknesses. And it is very, very important to know where you are holding. Honesty with ourselves is more important than even honesty with others, because if we're honest with ourselves, there's no reason to be dishonest with others. But honesty, in terms of where we're holding, is quite important. A person is responsible for taking care of themselves. The Rav was very clear that we have to take care of members of our community. That goes without saying. But it is impossible to take care of other people unless we're taking care of ourselves. Getting enough sleep, getting daily exercise in, mindfulness and meditation and relaxation practice, eating healthy, not drinking 15 cups of coffee a day. These are all critical things that we have to do. We have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And we see this in Pirkei Avos, where Hillel said, Himena Nili, if I'm not taking care of myself, who's going to watch out for me? Now, of course, Kushe La'atzmi Mani is quite important. That comes next. But again, you got to take care of the first step first, before you can take care of the second step second. We have a responsibility to be happy and healthy people in order to help other people be happy and healthy people. We also lead by example. I look around this room and I don't see anybody under the age of 11, which suggests that we are all responsible adults. And we have responsibilities to take care of other people, and that's frankly impossible unless we're taking care of ourselves. If you care about other people, you need to take care of yourself. It's not enough to tuck in the kids on time. We have to tuck in ourselves on time. It's not enough to tell the kids not to drink too much soda. We have to tell ourselves to eat healthy. It's not enough to make sure the kids have time to run around outside. We have to make sure that we are on the treadmill or the spinny bike or that Tai Chi Pilates thing that we do every single day. How do we make the diagnosis? How do we know if things are going bad? How do we address this? How do we identify who is suffering? I like to think about 2 D's for a diagnosis: deviance and dysfunction. Everything is a spectrum, right? I'm kind of a tall fellow, but I have a brother-in-law who's about 2 meters tall. For anybody that is not Israeli Legamre, that's like 6'6". He's a very tall guy. In fact, he's the tallest Jew that I know who's not named Yehoshaphat. It's a really good joke if you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you can borrow somebody's Google. Now, that fellow is very, very tall. He's about 6'10", and my brother-in-law, being that he's about 6'6", actually can't ride in a plane with the rest of us. He has to sit in first class, not because he's so hushuv, but because his knees hurt him and his back hurts him. So he is deviant to one side, and it causes dysfunction in that he has areas where he can't function like the rest of us. He gets into trouble doing the things that the rest of us are expected to do. If he sits in steerage with the rest of us, then he actually can't hang out that next day when we get off the plane because his back hurts him, his knees hurt him. So at some point, deviance causes dysfunction. The person is so far to one side that they're not able to get through life. Again, we are all sad sometimes. Most of us are not sad every day. And for people who are sad every day that are no longer showing up at work, that are no longer taking care of the kids, that are no longer present with their spouse, that are no longer showing up for their chavrusa, now they have dysfunction in addition to their deviance. Everybody is anxious.